Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner here at HFO Investment Real Estate. And today we have the pleasure of having the one and only Christian Kaylor, economist with the state of Oregon and specialist in Portland, by the way. Thanks for coming in. I know you've been here before, so let's just jump right into it. What's going on in the economy in Oregon and Portland? Let's dig in.
It just won't stop. Here we are, it's spring of 2019.
Yep.
And that's kind of a big deal because 10 years ago, the economy was just cratering.
Right.
The first 3 months of 2009, the unemployment rate went up 3 points in 3 months.
Wow.
It was just, we didn't know where the bottom was going to be. And it ended up, late 2009, again, coming up on the 10th anniversary, being double-digit unemployment numbers, lots of job loss. The construction industry lost 40% of all of its jobs. A lot of industries lost 20-30% of all their jobs, in the 2009-2010 timeframe. So we're coming to the 10th anniversary of that.
It's hard to believe.
And it's been all job growth since then. And it was slow job growth in 2011, 2012. I don't want to overstate it, but 2013 it kicked into extremely high gear. And nationally, but particularly locally, still seeing job growth coming up on the 10th anniversary.
Which is the longest recovery that I've,
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about it being the second longest recovery in history, and maybe if it runs another 6 or 12 months. Recessions were pretty different in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I think the economy is fundamentally different from what it was then. But yeah, you're talking about something that is pretty unusual.
Right. And again, like you said, when we came out of it, it was slow. I remember we had discussions about this, and we're coming out of the depths of the recession. Our growth was slow, but now, like you said, the last few years, we've really kind of hit high gear, and we slowed down a little bit. Maybe you can tell me what 18 and 19 look like, or what we see moving forward.
Well, we are seeing slowing job growth nationally, and particularly Oregon and Portland area in the 2018 numbers. Where we were doing 2.5%, almost 3% job growth numbers beginning about, I'd say 2013, 2014 through 2017. Those numbers have now slowed into the region of 1.5%, 2% in the Portland region for job growth. Still above average for the U.S., still doing well. But the U.S. has slowed as well. And this makes sense. And in fact, a lot of economists thought this was well overdue. We're now looking at almost 2.5 years now of an unemployment rate in the neighborhood of 4% or lower in the Portland region. And what happens when you get an unemployment rate that low, in the area of 4%, businesses really struggle to the point of often just not
being able to fill positions.
To fill positions. Right. And frequently they just can't fill positions. So even if a business is seeing the job orders coming in, they've got the workload, the phone is ringing, they're turning away work because they simply don't have the bodies. And we're sort of hearing that anecdotally for the last couple of years. Now it looks like we're finally starting to see what we thought we'd see even a year or two ago, which is slowing job growth, but not stalling out. Continuing to grow every sector in the Portland.
Now I know you said it's across the United States. We're seeing is it slower? Is it slower growth on the West Coast? Or are we still kind of outpacing the rest of the nation? It's one thing to say we're slowing, but when you're at a hyper growth rate and you slow a little bit,
right? Yeah, so the pattern we've seen over the last few years is, so for instance in 2017, Oregon was the 4th fastest growing state in the country in 2017 for job creation. And number 1 was Idaho, number 2 was Nevada, number 3 was Washington. So we bordered, the top 3, and we were the 4th fastest growing state.
We could just get Montana to come around, we'd be just...
Yeah, and so Pacific Northwest doing very, very well. But you saw in 2017, and really in the economic recovery overall, the Midwest, the Plains states, the Deep South, Alabama, Arkansas, and really the Northeast, Massachusetts, New York, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, have had much slower job growth rates the last couple of years. That overall trend seems to be continuing. Okay. But now they're all moving a little slower. So I checked the numbers today. Nebraska has not created a job in the last 12 months. 0% growth. Wow. Louisiana, 0% growth. Rhode Island, 0% growth. We have a couple of states where I have Minnesota, 0.3% job growth over the last 12 months. They're not in a recession, they're not shrinking, but they're barely growing.
Got it.
And again, I suspect you look at particularly some of these plain states, it's common in states like Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota to see unemployment rates closer to 3%. So again, I think the question economists are sort of asking themselves when you see these sorts of very, very low growth numbers are, okay, it's tempting to think there might be a recession coming. But on the other hand, the unemployment rate is so incredibly low.
Is it a matter of just not having bodies to fill positions?
It seems more likely to be true. And that's where Oregon and the West Coast, Pacific Northwest are doing so well, is we're still attracting people.
Right.
So that seems to be making the difference. Places like California, Arizona, Idaho, the Mountain West, Texas, absolutely. Texas doing fantastic. If you look at the 12 largest metro areas in the United States, fastest growing metro areas in the United States, I think Texas has 4 of the fastest 12.
I saw that, yeah.
I think California has another 3 or something. So just between California and Texas, half the fastest growing 12 regions in America are in Texas and California right now. Because they're attracting the workforce. I think the regions that can bring in the workers from wherever they're coming from, mostly other places in the United States,
will continue that job creation growth.
And those that can't, and again, pretty much anything on the East Coast, north of DC, pretty much anything in the Midwest, anything in the Plain States, the Deep South, really, really struggling, both with population growth and with job creation.
So then we just saw something a couple weeks ago, talking about the immigration to the area here in Portland is slowing down.
Yes.
And again, is that just a matter of kind of what we just talked about on the job growth, when you're at this hyper rate, a little bit of slowdown almost kind of gets you back to maybe a normal rate, or was it something that you're seeing? Is it, hey, this is something we're going to see across the United States, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the superstar economies right now in the U.S., the fastest growing regions in the U.S., Orlando, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Dallas, Austin, Houston, Sacramento, those are probably dominate the top 10 fastest growing regions in America in the last 12 months data that we have. And one of the things that I think all those places have in common, particularly compared to Portland, is much lower cost of living for housing.
Right.
Not to mention, they don't have an urban growth boundary. They don't have the geographic limits that we have. Portland sometimes comes up on lists as being really sort of looking weird if you look at population density numbers. Well, we have two volcanoes in the Portland region, right? We've got Mount Hood and we've got Mount St. Helens. So in a place like Las Vegas, there's not a lot of natural boundaries that are just stopping them.
And the zoning boundaries aren't there, so you can just go and go.
And so Phoenix, maybe the 3rd fastest growing region in the country, both population and job growth, they can just go out into the desert. They're not going to run into a national forest or the Columbia River or something.
Which helps with affordability.
Which absolutely helps with affordability. And so one of the things that we saw, particularly in Portland, is that job growth was really kind of concentrated in the early part of the recovery, 2013, 2014, even 2012, in highly technical, professional occupations and industries.
Right.
So we saw software just taking off and really booming back then, along with law firms, engineering firms, architecture firms, advertising firms. So companies that were looking for affordable Class A office real estate, downtown Portland, and a college-educated workforce, they did really, really well. And you see that nationally as well. The last 2 or 3 years, this recovery has shifted into more of a blue-collar recovery.
So going back to manufacturing?
Manufacturing had the best year for job growth in the Portland area in 2018. It's had in 20 years.
Wow, so it's flipped.
It went flipped, but now we're not seeing tech booming, at least in 2018 in terms of job growth. The software side anyway. Manufacturing had a pretty good year. And when I say manufacturing, food manufacturing, metals manufacturing, transportation equipment, it was across the board. Manufacturing had a fantastic year nationally and locally, and those are jobs. They're not college graduates. They don't need Class A office space in downtown Portland. It's more suburban. You don't need folks who have college degrees. You do need to hire a lot of entry-level people that only make about $30,000, $40,000 a year doing some of the cleanup sort of stuff. they can't afford a $500,000, $600,000 home. And you don't have to pay that in Phoenix or Boise or Orlando. You can buy a home for $300,000, $250,000 in some of those.
So if you're coming to Portland, you're looking tertiary markets outside of Portland. That's when we've seen a lot of growth, down the valley, Lebanon, Salem, Albany, rent growth that was always last to kind of come in the last 2 years. We've seen explosive rent growth there because, like you said, I think the job growth has changed to more of blue collar manufacturing. They don't need to be in the core downtown.
And so again, what propelled Portland was this high wage growth. A lot of six-figure income folks happy to move to Portland. They could still afford it, and they still can. It's gotten less affordable in the last 8 years, maybe, in the Portland area. But yeah, now we're seeing more growth, particularly construction, manufacturing, healthcare, which can be a mixed bag. There's doctors in there, but there's also nurses and support staff who might make $40,000, $50,000 a year. They can't afford a $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 home. I think those lower price markets are now doing well because of the nature of their recovery. As
an economist analyst, when you're looking at various recoveries, and like you said, when we talked years ago, is the unique thing was this job growth all seemed to be centered in Portland, which was unusual for our metro area. All the higher, the middle wage wasn't there; it was all high end. Is this kind of more of I don't want to say normal, but back to maybe something almost feels more sustainable for a longer term?
Yeah, we're seeing some preliminary data, and I talked about this a lot, previous last few years. The city of Portland seemed to be the rock star over the last 8-10 years for job creation and population growth in the Portland region.
Yes, which it's usually not.
And which it was not, 20, 30 years ago at all. It was about Hillsborough, or it was about, Vancouver.
Clark County,
yeah,
it was, yes.
Yeah, Clackamas County. And so what I think happened was, again, those office buildings and professionals who wanted to have a shorter commute in, who could afford housing close in, could afford to fix up an older home closer into downtown Portland. We're seeing preliminary data showing that I think Hillsborough is now probably the rock star in the Portland region for the last couple of years.
Based on job growth.
Based on job growth, population, income profile, the demographics that are out in Hillsborough. Now we're seeing more of those tech workers more comfortable living out in some of those suburbs. Not all of them, but Hillsborough would be one I would definitely point to.
Okay. And now have you seen, I know you're really specifically Oregon and Portland. Do you see that same trend in Seattle, San Francisco? I mean, is it similar on the West Coast, or was it Portland was kind of unique in terms of, like you said, the explosive job growth, population growth, wage increasing? We didn't have that middle. Did the other cities have similar to that, or it was just
about half did? I think when you look around the country, you see a number of metro areas. Seattle is one of them. I think Austin is another one, where the city center seemed to be sort of the economic driver of the region.
Got it.
And as you say, I think we are going back to more of what we traditionally think of as a more balanced sort of growth around the region. But Washington State, latest data I have, 5th fastest growing state in the country. And I haven't seen Seattle specific numbers. They're doing a little better than us, but they're becoming more and more of a tech hub. And tech has just had a fantastic run. So you see the Bay Area and you see the Seattle area. Now, those of us might remember, 2000, 2001, they got hit very hard in that recession.
Yes.
Harder than just about anybody else. So, they're still doing great. Those tech hubs can continue to do that, but they're going to hit a limit on I think, the price pressure. And if they do implode, there's a lot of leveraging there in those housing markets. There's a lot of money and equity wrapped up in those houses that could be in difficult place if tech pops the same way it did 20 years ago. I'm not predicting that, but
if it like you said, when you're all kind of based on one industry, when that gets hit, similar to we were back in the 90s with the timber industry. I mean, when Oregon, that first big recession that I remember, that was, that's kind of when we started the whole change and getting more kind of a diverse economy, which has benefited us greatly. But like you said, this recovery was different. It was so Portland central.
Yeah, I looked up a statistic this week. Over the last 17 years, the number of college graduates living in the city of Portland doubled.
Wow. Wow.
It just doubled. Now the rest, everywhere in Oregon sort of grew, but nobody doubled in the number of college graduates in Oregon, in a town or something. So 1/4 of all the new college graduates in Oregon since 2000 just live in the city of Portland. So, again, very, very Portland-centric, but I feel like that is leveling off.
Okay.
I feel like the housing prices have got to a point where, the suburbs are starting to look like a really good deal, and I think they are.
I don't want to say it's equilibrium, but where you've got.
I think it's balanced. I don't want to say that the city is over and job growth will go to exclusively the suburbs, but I think it's balancing out somewhat more.
Speaking of that, and housing costs, I mean, affordability has been a huge kind of topic that we've been involved with. And what do you see in terms of policies or things like that, in terms of what, from an affordability standpoint? I mean, we have this demand, it's coming. Kind of what's your take on that, and where we're going to be in the next couple of years?
I think that's
I'm not
the hottest.
asking you to predict the housing market, but just.
I mean, I think that's the hottest policy debate right now. Again, we're talking about the city of Portland. The city of Portland's boxed in.
Yeah.
I had a conversation 15 years ago with the city council of Milwaukee, not Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Oregon here. Yeah. And I was talking about population growth. Their population growth, and I haven't checked recent numbers, was fairly stagnant, 10 years ago. And they said, well, we have nowhere to grow. I mean, they said, well, we're geographically, there's a Willamette River, the city of Portland, there's Clackamas County, we can't, where would we go? And I go, well, they're nice about it, but it was like, you need to replace some of these single family homes with duplexes, triplexes, apartments. You can't only be a single family community. You're right, you can't grow in population. That's true for the city of Portland as well. I mean, there's nowhere for the city of Portland. The Portland region can grow, out. The city of Portland can't. So, I mean, I think these policies around zoning and density that, are being debated right now. Yep. I think that is a context for the city of Portland that maybe others, the legislature is debating this, which in a way is very silly because, I mean, the economy, cities in Oregon are so diverse. Right. The idea that you're going to come up with a zoning plan at a state level to apply to every city in Oregon, it seems heroic, let's say. The city of Portland, though, I mean, if it wants to grow, it has to increase density. Right. So that is not true for most cities in Oregon. That is not necessary. So I think that
it's not true for a lot of cities that, it's not true for Las Vegas.
Right.
I mean, like you talked about, there's no boundaries and they can keep going.
Right. So this debate, I mean, for the city of Portland, it's like, well, if we don't increase, actual height, then we're stagnant by definition as a city. That isn't true for most communities in Oregon, and so it's just a different conversation about trade-offs in other communities. There's no trade-off for the city of Portland. Either it's stagnant, or to grow, we have to increase density. Right. So the policy debate is simply very, very different in the city of Portland than it is in, say, Albany or
Medford. Or,
right.
Yeah. And are you seeing traction? I mean, I know they're debating it down the legislature. I mean, is there a feel, because there's always been this kind of push and pull with, how do you increase density in Portland's got a very high percentage of single family neighborhoods. Yeah. When you look at other cities. Right. How do you get that kind of going through? What's your kind of, I mean, I know you talked to a lot of legislators and you're brought into a lot of meetings. I mean, what is the feeling on? I mean, you'll have to ask the legislators. I have actually spoken to some legislators on these issues, and again, I feel like it's very neighborhood specific. Yeah. And the Portland legislators, the Gresham legislators, see it in a certain way because they come from a certain community. So again, to have the debate at a state level seems odd to me. I think that within the city of Portland, I think there is I don't want to say consensus because there isn't a consensus. I believe a majority of people, and I mean like 60% of the population of the city of Portland, understands that in order for the city to grow, it needs to increase density. Yeah. I think that 30 to 40% of the population does not understand that, or is perfectly happy to see the city of Portland population be exactly where it is for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, which is totally unrealistic. But that's sort of an idealized vision of the future when they think about what Portland's going to look like in 20, 50 or something. Which you try to, get people to realize, like you said, if you're not expanding and growing, you're being stagnant. What does that long term? What does that do for a city? I mean, you're going to see job growth go other places. You just can't continue.
No, you actually need the growth just to finance the repair and maintenance of existing infrastructure. Right. Prices go up. Inflation exists sort of everywhere. So even if your population grows at 0%, even if it's not negative, the cost of pavement goes up 2% a year. The cost of hiring people to replace pavement goes up 2% a year.
And how do you fund for that?
And so, when the cost of pavement goes up 2% and your tax base is growing by 0%, it's actually a matter of, do you fire a school teacher, do you fire a firefighter, or do you let the, bridge, do you risk the bridge is going to collapse over the Willamette River? I mean, it's a very different conversation that I don't think people fully appreciate, that you only have bad options in front of you. You have no good options in front of you in a zero growth strategy.
Right. Well, we'll see. I mean, I do think the density conversation is now, like you said, is kind of the forefront of the housing affordability and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how successful they are in getting some of these through, and then the implementation of these. Because again, something you get passed in Salem, how does it affect each city? And
and the legislation, as I understand it now, as it's being worked on, it excludes cities of less than 10,000 people.
Yeah.
And I think actually, it might be a surprise, but if you actually looked at a list of cities, Coos Bay doesn't have 10,000 people in it. So I mean, there's a number of cities that are, Klamath Falls doesn't have 10,000 people in it. So there's a number of cities you've probably heard of that actually, as a city, the county, is much larger. So I think once they put in that 10,000 thing, a bunch of rural communities go,
we don't care. We're out.
Doesn't affect us at all.
Yes.
Do whatever you want to do. Which again, to me, is like, this is a Portland discussion, because this is a Portland conundrum. And I think in Portland we can come up with some sort of compromise that'll make most people happy around density. We don't need Burns, Oregon to be in the room for that conversation, because there's a different situation.
Yeah, they shouldn't be there. I mean, they're not having the same effects, or they don't have the same issues they're trying to address.
Yeah, so again, doing it at a state level just seems odd to me. I mean, if they want to give local areas tools, but we have Metro, we have a city council, we have a county commission, we have enough people working on it. It's odd to me that it's a state issue. I don't understand.
It's just tough to get things through on that. I mean, you start talking about affordability, housing, density in people's neighborhoods. It is a touchy subject. I mean, it does really. It's one thing to be talking about legislation. You think it's down the road or it's down the street. It's not going to matter when people start talking about their neighborhoods. It gets very contentious, I would say.
I had a conservative, a politically conservative developer come up to me after a presentation I gave a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me what my opinion was about Portland forcing people to build duplexes and triplexes. I mean, that was how he framed it.
Yeah.
And this is a developer, and I said, I believe personally in a free market in property development, and I know, because I know him, and I won't say his name, but I knew him. I've known him fairly well, and I said, I know you do too. But I mean, the context for it from him was the city as a government really pushing people to do something they don't want to do. So it's interesting to hear that even from conservatives who develop for a living, who have this vision, they don't like the government getting involved. And I said, they're deregulating.
That's exactly, yeah. We're deregulating.
We're deregulating something here. We're taking away a zoning regulation.
I'm not saying you have to do it, but you can do it.
We're not ordering you.
Right.
It's sort of like marijuana or gay marriage. No one is going to come to your house and tell you have to marry a man and smoke marijuana.
We're just opening it up to.
They're opening it up as an option. Right. And so but again, I think similar, I shouldn't use those as analogies, but similar to the gay marriage debate with marijuana, once gay marriage became legal, once marijuana became legal, it went away as a debate.
Right.
I mean, at least in the communities that did it, like Oregon or Colorado or Washington, we're like, oh, we have gay marriage now. And
but we're still having the debate on density is interesting. In terms of, because on one hand, we've got this affordability issue that we all acknowledge.
Right.
And, part of me, we were kind of saying here, do we want to go to say to people, if you don't increase density from our standpoint, for owners or our clients, their housing is going to be worth more. But that's not for the good of the city and the good for the economy. We need to get which is going to be increasing density. We can't spread out.
I'd push back on some piece though of that, and I agree with you, but I would push back on equity. I think that, and I mean that, home equity.
Yes.
So maybe there's a bumper sticker there. The income inequality of home equity. That is, by opening up triplexes to people who can't afford a single family home, they could buy a starter home and develop home equity.
Yes.
So that in 5 or 10 years they can leverage that into something else. By not building duplexes and triplexes, you're literally depriving lower income people.
No, I agree.
The chance to build equity.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way,
And so I think that there is a benefit to the city of Portland in seeing rising home values.
Oh, for sure.
If we let lower income people in on the party, and frankly, zoning deprives them of that. And so it's very interesting just to, again, to my silly anecdote about, I don't want to say his name, but my friend who's a politically conservative developer.
Who you think would be all over deregulation. And,
yes, you think that ideologically he would be the fan for it. And it seemed to be his number one concern, is the city was going to sort of force him to do this. The politics of this right and left are just so bizarre.
Yes.
Where I have good liberal friends who just think it's terrible, and when I say, what would you do to fight income inequality, to help lower income people rise up and succeed in our community, they usually come up with another government program. And I go, creating a whole government program to fix a problem caused by another government program, is this getting out of hand? But again, the politics of it are so interesting to me, to sort of see conservatives where you wouldn't expect them to be. And I think liberals, I see a lot of liberals in places where I wouldn't personally expect them to be. And so you're seeing some very weird debates going on. But so this is my crystal ball moment. I think that the city, the metro area, there's enough political power behind this. One of the things they're doing that's pretty smart is they're just going to get rid of the single family overlay everywhere.
Right.
But in a way, it's sort of a brilliant way of cutting the Gordian knot of this political debate. Instead of saying, what do you think about taking away the single family overlay in this specific block?
Just cross it with the whole thing.
Let's go. Everybody is going to do it. And so no one can say, well, this house over here, it doesn't make any sense. It's not about that house over there. It doesn't make sense for the city to have it as an overlay. And in a way, you sort of just get it out with one push. And again, I think, like the marijuana debate, we've had legalized marijuana. The sky did not collapse. We haven't seen a spike in crime. We haven't seen, Mad Max in the streets of Oregon. I strongly suspect that something will get pushed through in the next 2 or 3 years, at least in the Portland region, if not statewide.
Yeah.
And I suspect that the doomsayers who think that all of a sudden, 150-year-old homes that don't exist will be bulldozed and turned into,
6-story apartment building.
Six-story apartment buildings in a neighborhood with a cul-de-sac or something. When that doesn't happen, I think that this debate could actually really improve.
Yes. I hope so. I mean, we hope.
And then maybe we can have further conversations about it where people don't say, oh, if you get rid of this zoning restriction, the sky will fall.
All right. Because we talked about it's really hard to have a discussion about housing affordability and then not looking at income inequality. I mean, you can't address, those are very hard to address. You've got to address both of them. I mean, you can't.
I'll say, I've been doing this job 19 years. It's hard for me to think of any economic issue I've ever addressed that doesn't intersect with income inequality.
Right.
And housing certainly too.
Right.
But taxes and education and transportation,
It's all tied into that. Yes. So for your crystal ball looking forward, in terms of, so Portland, Oregon economy still, we're not as robust as we were. Right. But I don't know if that was sustainable anyway. We had a speech a couple of years ago. It was kind of a head scratcher, like we're hot and continue to going, and so. Yeah,
I think in a way there are a lot of economists who. So Oregon is pretty tightly linked with the national economy. So I think when you ask about crystal ball for Oregon, and Portland area, I'm gonna think a lot about the national economy, because there's a lot of economists who sort of have this massive debate about it, and I think that believe it or not, probably the wished for scenario among economists is to see what looks like is happening in 2019, and that is essentially a slowing, not a stall. That would be a different situation. But for economic growth to slow, but again, at a 4% unemployment rate, you can't grow at 2-3% year after year. There's just nowhere to go. So if the economy slows, if we see GDP growth numbers slow, I think it's mid-April right now. There's going to be a big report out in a week or two. The Bureau of Economic Analysis is going to put out their first quarter GDP preliminary estimate. There's a lot of discussion about what may or may not be in there. Believe it or not, the scarier scenario among economic forecasters is that we see something like 3% GDP growth nationally, because that will suggest an overheating situation. And the Federal Reserve, I don't want to pick particularly on the Federal Reserve, but I'll mention the Federal Reserve first, and I'll come back to it. But the Federal Reserve will feel that the economy may be overheating because of the lack of bodies. The unemployment rate is so low, the only way businesses can grow at 3% is to raise wages to steal workers from other companies.
Right.
And that could create inflationary pressure.
Which we haven't seen a lot of.
Which we haven't seen any inflation rate.
At all.
And again, you have this very low unemployment rate for a prolonged period of time. Theory tells us we should be seeing inflation.
I know.
It's still not popping up. We're seeing some gas price movement, but again, that tends to fluctuate quite a bit. So, but it's not just the Federal Reserve. I think other economists are getting worried that if anything, the risk is an overheating of the economy that could turn into something dramatic. If we do see GDP numbers come down into the neighborhood of 2%, and see that throughout 2019, I think you'll see a lot of economists breathing a sigh of relief.
Which feels like kind of what is happening here locally.
Yes.
That we had this concern of inflation should be here. We're at these numbers, and now we're kind of a more normalized growth rate, and it's kind of like maybe we've got more runway.
I mean, if somebody came back from the future, an economist came back from the future and said, I'm from the year 2021, and in the year 2021 there's a very, very bad recession. So obviously, this is not true. But if they were to,
they got in their DeLorean and came back.
Then what is the hints that we currently see in front of us that would suggest that scenario? And that's really, believe it or not, it sounds strange. Basically, the economy overheating for lack of bodies in the labor force is thought of as a fairly serious risk. Not itself, but essentially that it would cause other domino effects to fall. You'd see inflation. You'd see a lot of businesses pushed out who can't keep up. You'd see other problems sort of pop up, other macroeconomic challenges downstream that would cause sort of the entire economy to stall or decline. So if we do see slower job growth numbers, which we are starting to see, and we do see slower economic growth numbers overall in a broad-based way, there may not be a recession in the future for the next year or two.
Okay, well that's good news. Good to hear. We don't know, but I'm not going to hold you to that. But I mean, like you said.
Well, I've had this job through 2 major recessions.
Right.
And I have to tell you, and I remember it very, very well, and we aren't seeing any of the leading economic indicators that we saw then now. Every recession is different. So whatever future recession that may happen will probably be different from those other ones. But we did see for at least a year or two before,
some signs.
We saw issues, and we would sort of say, well, is that just the financial industry? Is that just high tech? Will it be isolated to those industries? And they weren't. But now I can't find an industry that appears to be in trouble.
Right.
I can't. And every time you sort of see something anecdotal, you'll see an individual company and it'll put out a report and it's pretty negative. But then you look at the broader industry, or you wait a quarter and then the company bounces back, and it's really, there's a little devil on my shoulder that sits there, and he says, the recession is coming. The recession is coming. You should look for the signs. And I give him an hour or two a day where I look for the signs. And I can't find them.
Right.
And I follow the other cynical economists, and they're not making, they either can't find one or their arguments just aren't
holding water.
No.
They're searching so hard that they're,
Yeah, I mean, you can see patterns in anywhere,
Right.
but again, there's certain things I look at. One of is recreation spending, which tends to be very cyclical. So when people are feeling really good about,
they spend more money on
they
recreation.
spend more money, they go on vacation. The 2 hottest economies right now are Las Vegas and Orlando in the United States of America.
Which is recreational spending.
It's tourism. So Americans are spending tourism dollars at really high numbers. They aren't worried they're going to get laid off in 12 months. Right. And to say, when they do get concerned, and that could be a signal of future coming recession, you'll see tourism decline. You'll see hotels, restaurants. You'll see places like Orlando, Las Vegas. You'll see them get hit
back.
First.
Right.
There's
Nothing.
no sign of it.
Yeah.
Temporary staffing services, no sign of decline. Trucking numbers, shipping numbers, you go through it. The stock market's up, I think 14, 15% as we speak today in mid-April.
Right.
When you're watching this, I don't know. We're up something like 15% since January 1st on the stock market. So again, the stock market doesn't see anything for at least the 6 months or whatever it looks out. It's quiet. It's oddly quiet,
Yes,
but it's quiet.
but it's quiet,
And
yes.
again, it's the 10th anniversary.
I know, which
so
is,
it,
I know,
you
we go back to the original start of this conversation. We're coming on the 10th anniversary, which is, you know, like I said, you kind of keep looking back thinking it's got to be coming, but there's no signs for it. So,
I'll let you know.
yeah, well, we'll be looking to hear. So, thanks again for coming. We'll
Yeah.
see you next time at HFO TV and go from there. Thank you. It was great. Thank you very much.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.